in this administration?
Yes, they do. Admittedly, we were slow, as was Jimmy Carter in his first year, in making appointments to women, but it's getting better all the time. I'm very optimistic that as we progress through this administration, that we will have an excellent record on appointments for women. I feel so strongly about that before the campaign, I organized a program that I called Target 80s, which was a recruitment program. I contacted people all over the country, asking them to send me in resumes of women who were interested in being in government and who were qualified to hold a position. This is an ongoing program. We are working constantly to bring more and more women in. We have a large number of influential women who are actively participating in the administration. In fact, we have put together just recently a sort of a communications network of women in the administration who have to come by and visit with us someday and meet them.
Oh, I'll respond to that. I don't think Betty needs to be defensive about that at all. She's right. The administration has been slow. The women, but that's not unique. And there are a number of women who have been appointed. A surprising number of women have been appointed. I don't know why I say surprising. One of the reasons always for no, some people think it's surprising. It's not surprising. One of the reasons always for trying to get a woman into any position appointed by any person is because people get accustomed to seeing her there. And the likelihood is that she will be replaced by a woman because politically and for other reasons that appears to make sense. I can cite that in my own case and many others. But, I mean, you know, why were there a string of women at the head of HUD? I mean, it's the same thing. But so what I started to say was surprisingly, it's not surprisingly, a number of people, women appointees in the previous administration have been succeeded by women. It's true of Carol Foreman. It's true of the woman who heads the Agriculture Marketing Service. I mean, there are a lot of women who have been appointed. Now, there may be a lot of people, and I may be one of them, who may not agree philosophically or politically or in any particular way with some of these women. But that's not the same issue as to whether they have been appointed. And they have been. And so I don't think there's any, I mean, that's really two different issues, I think, as to whether there's a commitment to women and their issues or whether women have been appointed at all.
Any other comments on that one? Let me pick one or two more, and then the hour is getting late, and I'll let the panelists off the hook a little bit. How much clout do women have in the state when they come to someone running a state campaign at the Republican National Committee, when they come as a group not simply of women who happen to be women, but of women organized and committed on what we tend to think of as the feminist issues? Our panel tonight is not simply about women in politics, it's about feminist politics. How much clout does the women's movement have? And is it true, as some of our speakers have suggested, that it somehow lost its clout, that it can't come into the smoke-filled room and deliver anything to the party? Lizzie, why don't you start on that?
Massachusetts, that's not true at all, and I can't talk about nationwide. In Massachusetts,
Into the mic.
I think in Massachusetts, the women who started really with Anne and have continued, are still very active, have great influence on campaigns, power broking, conventions, really the entire system. And I think that probably that may be peculiar here, but I just don't think that in this state that there is an opportunity for any woman who wants to. I know some of them disagree with me, but I don't know. I've been involved in a lot of it, and even when I was executive directing the state committee, there was an open opportunity and equal opportunity, equal input on almost every level, except with our elected gentlemen all the way through.
I think we're just looking at it two different ways. I'm looking at the power out front, and you're looking at the power as it pertains to a process and a structure.
Yeah, right.
And we differ on that, because the end result to me is what is important. And if the end result is not producing women then somewhere along the process, it is not serving us. I have to address the issue of skills and qualifications and education because I see that as a hindrance for women. And maybe because I come from another whole perspective, and that black people were not trained in any political process at all. And black elected officials who have run across this country were not trained how to run, were not given the opportunity to study the political process, only knew that they had to be a part of that process, and in so doing that, jumped into the race and learned on the job. I think that if we continue to go the way of educating the women, then it slows down our ability to achieve power. Now, there were some good women running in the last legislative race. These were well-educated women who have been a part of the Women's Political Caucus for a very long time, did not get elected. And damn it, they had the skills, they had the education, they had the training, and yet they did not get elected. And I'm talking about one woman that's here in the room. Another woman comes from Hingham, who was beat by another woman, very conservative, who was not supported by any kind of a women's organization. And so I think that we have to, in those areas that women can jump right in, they should jump in, and other women who know the process, who understand the process, should help them. They should immediately go to them and say, listen, I'll be your campaign manager, or I'll be your fundraiser. I know a little bit about politics. We'll begin to set up the campaign. I just don't think that the educational process is always the way to go. There's all kinds of ways that you can be elected. And if we don't start looking at those all kinds of ways, those alternative ways of women getting elected in the political process, then I don't care if you have affirmative action. I don't care how many seats you gain in the Democratic National Committee or the Republican National Committee. If we don't have the commitment to push women into the political arena and help them to get in there and to stay in there, then we can educate the whole world. I mean, it's just not about education. And we need to stop doing that. When men jump into the political arena,
Work or work for the success of a party that ignores her sex.
Our next panelist, Betty Heitman, comes to us from the Republican National Committee, where she serves as the co-chair since July of 1980. She began her political career as a poll watcher and headquarters volunteer, and has in the short time since worked her way up, joined the National Federation of Republican Women in 1964 and rose to be the Federation president in 1978, has been a leader in the Louisiana Republican Party for some time and has worked in every gubernatorial, congressional, and most local Republican campaigns in her district, as well as several special elections around the state, and has been a delegate to a number of the Republican National Conventions, beginning, I believe, in the 1960s. Betty?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that we have a couple of very prominent, well-respected pollsters who disagree with the figures that Ann just gave. I think, first of all, I'd like to point up the fact that historical record proves that the Republican Party initiated affirmative action for women. And I'd like to just quickly go through some things. As early as 1872, the Fifth Republican National Convention was the first, we had the first national declaration favoring additional rights for women. In 1872, Republican National Convention approved admission of women. In 1878, a Republican senator from California introduced the first proposal to give women the vote. In 1892, women were seated at the Republican National Convention, and on to 1923. It was a Republican woman who first initiated the Equal Rights Amendment. In 1923, it was two Republicans, Senator Curtis and Representative Anthony, who introduced the Equal Rights Amendment in the Congress. I think probably I can illustrate the upward mobility that is available to women in the Republican Party by telling you something about myself and about how I arrived at the position which I now hold. When I became active in the Republican Party 18 years ago in Louisiana, there basically was no Republican Party. It was literally a paper party. There were a number of us who grew up in the South, had lived under complete and absolute Democrat rule, and we had decided that under this rule we had non-competitive government and a complete stifling of some of our rights and some of our representation. Believe me, the Democrats in my state did not represent me as a person, much less as a woman. What they did in my state was spend their time dividing up the spoils of office. There were a group of people who cared very much about building a two-party system in the state of Louisiana, and after a great deal of hard work, I will tell you that by 1972, when my state, which at that time roughly had 1,800,000 voters, and of those voters, roughly 2% of them were registered Republican, we elected our first Republican congressman. I think you can get varied opinions from Democrats and Republicans in the state of Louisiana that with competition has come better government in our state. For a woman from a state that frowned on women being involved in politics at all, I thought it was quite remarkable that in a very short time I rose to become president of the Louisiana Federation of Republican Women, and from there went on to become the national president of the National Federation of Republican Women. I will also add that there would be no Republican Party in the state of Louisiana today if it had not been for the Republican women. I'd like to tell you some of the end results that have come about in the Republican Party as a result of our affirmative action programs. Affirmative action without quotas, I might add. We have viewed for a long time women as the majority in this country, and we have set about to equip them with the skills that they need and the knowledge that they need to have upward mobility within our party. As president of the National Federation of Republican Women, I initiated a series of campaign schools for women, which we held all across this country. Between the Republican National Committee and the National Federation of Republican Women, we have trained some 3,000 women all across this country to assume leadership roles in campaigns or to become candidates themselves. The result of this has been that we have women serving in leadership roles at every level throughout the party, and I think this is reflected with the results that we've seen at the polls. It is interesting to note that the only two women who are serving in the United States Senate are Republican women. In the Congress, in the U.S. House of Representatives, there's an even split, 9-9, between the Democrats and the Republicans. But I think it's interesting to note that in 1980, the only four women who were elected to the Congress were Republican women. In state legislatures, the Democrats outnumber us slightly. They have, I think it's 389 to 371 Republicans. However, 13% of Republican state legislators are women, whereas 9% of Democrat state legislators are women. In 1978, 63 females were newly elected to state legislators. Of those 63, 62 were Republican women. When you look at the representation at the Republican National Committee of women, The RNC executive staff is 60% of our staff are women who are serving in director or coordinator policy-making positions. The executive director of the National Republican Congressional Committee is Nancy Sennett. The executive director of the Republican Governors Association is Carol Whitney. The political director of the Republican Senatorial Committee is Susan Bryant. I think it's quite obvious that without a quota system, but with affirmative action, which we do have and have had, women have had tremendous successes in the Republican Party.
Thank you.
Sissy Weinberg is the vice president of her own business, a business involving political consulting as well as business and cable consulting. She was the executive director of the Democratic State Committee here in Massachusetts. She's been involved as a consultant and an active campaign manager in numerous national and state campaigns here in Massachusetts, and she is currently managing the campaign of Scott Harshbarger for district attorney here in Middlesex County. Sissy?
Well, I first have to say that I told Betty just before we began, when we saw the lights and everything, I said, I won't pick on you if you don't pick on me. But I didn't say Ann wouldn't pick on her. So I feel like I should give Ann 5 minutes of my time or something. I come at this really from a different point of view, because the question that you put in front of us is affirmative action, our affirmative action guidelines necessary. And I feel very strongly about it, and I agree that they must be defined, and we must have a goal set for us, because I think that the position women are in today has come about from the women's movement. It didn't start within the political parties. Without the women's movement, we just wouldn't be where we are today. And I think that as women support and we grow, I'm not saying that the women's movement is all over and now the political parties should take it over. But if the political parties don't support it, then we're going to be in big trouble. Some statistics that are interesting is that in 1970, women legislators in this country nationally were 4%. By 1980, they were 12. That was not a result of affirmative action guidelines at that point. Women local officials, city councilors and mayors, increased from 3%. 1/10 of that 3% is right here, and, to 14%. So that you can see that as the women's movement gave us more exposure, we continue to be able to take positions of policy and grow. And I think that the affirmative action guidelines that the Democratic Party have are just vital to the continuing of that. I think another point that Ann and Betty haven't made, and that is that part of this whole thing, women succeeding, is how women feel about themselves. And when you have guidelines and you know that 50%, you can go into a caucus as simple as a state caucus or a national caucus and feel pretty good about what you're doing, and then go about it and do it properly and succeed. And I think that that's all part of having guidelines drawn for you, so you don't have to fight for those things, because there they are, and you're in pretty good shape to go on with the 50-50 division or whatever else you want to do. Just one quick example, and that is, I think that probably in Massachusetts, and I've forgotten the date, that I became executive director of the Democratic State Committee, but here in Massachusetts, which is a pretty liberal state, I was the first woman ever to be and running this campaign for district attorney. I asked my candidate today, I said, if you were running 10 years ago, would you have appointed a woman? And he looked at me, he said, good Lord, no. I mean, 10 years ago, and he is, a supporter of all women's causes. I think all those things are just an indication, and I think just everything that Ann has said just makes it terribly important that we have the guidelines and that we continue to work through those through the political party.
Our next speaker, Sandra Graham, has been a leading political figure here in Cambridge and in the state of Massachusetts for 12 years. predating anybody's affirmative action or equal division guidelines. She first ran for Cambridge City Council 12 years ago as an independent, was elected, and has served ever since on the Cambridge City Council. She later ran as well for state representative of the 28th Middlesex District to the Massachusetts House of Representatives and was again elected and has been one of our most successful women politicians in this area and a leading spokesperson for women's rights as well as many other concerns. Sandra?
Thank you. From listening to the conversation, I think I'm on the wrong platform. I was elected back in 1971 as an independent candidate to the Cambridge City Council when there was really no motivation and no action by women to help push me into the political system. I then ran in 1977 as an independent to the Mass State Legislature, and at that time there was really no women's group that pushed me into the state legislature. When they asked me about affirmative action, I automatically thought about third world people because it was back early then when black people across this country first implemented affirmative action. So I come from a different perspective. I'd like to just comment on the women's movement a bit because I think the women's movement, while they have made some gains, have not really made substantial gains that we should have made. And the reason I say that is because while we did get affirmative action within the Democratic Party, I supported Shirley Chisholm back in 1972 when she ran for the president of this country, and a lot of women did not. And we had the biggest fight within the Democratic Party that year. I remember it so well. I was on the platform committee of the Democratic Party, and it was there that we fought the battle for women and minorities. And we fought a very hard battle within the Democratic Party to get access to the political process. I will let you rely on Ian for the statistical data because I don't really know the statistical data. But being a politician in Massachusetts and being a woman politician in Massachusetts, it's very, very hard, even though we've made some gains. If we look at the state legislature, we still have all men in leadership. All men. You have the governor, you have the Senate president, you have the Speaker of the House, you have the majority whip, you have all of his leadership people who are all men. Women have not made the gains in chairmanships within the state legislature as one would have us think we have made those gains. In fact, there is only one woman who is the chair in the House of Representatives. That is a black woman named Representative Doris Bunty, and she received that seat because she was a black woman. So that while we have a women's caucus within the legislature, we have not been able to gain the kind of power that we deserve within the legislature. Nor has the Democratic Party ever endorsed, I don't believe, and I can be corrected, but in the years that I've been in politics, I have not seen the Democratic Party on a statewide level endorse a woman. On a statewide level. There is one woman congresswoman, and that is a Republican. All of our congresspeople are men except for the one Republican woman, and all of our U.S. senators are men. And I think that will show whether or not the Democratic Party has really accepted women in the political arena as having power. Because I think that what really shows is the end result. And if we do have power, then why don't we have women in powerful places? We do not have a woman the head of House Ways and Means, nor Senate Ways and Means, where all the appropriations get played out. Nor did we have women in the smoke-filled rooms who decided where that money goes and how that money is spent. We do have some very good women in the legislature who constantly fight for the rights of women. So giving all your statistics, Ann, I think that women are not as powerful in the Democratic Party as the women should be. As I perceive the political process is still male-dominated, and it will continue to be male-dominated as long as the males have the attitudes they have, and that women are still the workhorses. We are still the workhorses. And I think women have to recognize that. And women need to know, they really need to know what power is all about. And how do you deal with power? Or how do you achieve it? You take it. You take it. They don't give it to you. You take it. And you take it by whatever means necessary. And if we are so powerful within the Democratic Party, then why haven't we taken some of the very powerful seats in this Commonwealth? And I just want to say that my last election into the City Council, there was no women's movement in Cambridge to push not only myself, Mary Ellen Prusa, Alice Wolfe, who are very good candidates, Wendy Apt, who were women running strong in the city of Cambridge. And yet I am the only woman elected to office. And it wasn't because of a woman's vote. It was because of the black vote and my liberal support that I receive in the city of Cambridge. So that I don't think that women have moved as far along as one would tend to believe they have moved, because if we had we would be in power today, and we are not in power today because we have all males in the positions of power. And I would say that we probably have another decade to go, or it would be interesting to see the race in 1982, whether or not the state of Massachusetts elects a woman lieutenant governor, or whether or not the Democratic Party will even give the woman the endorsement. And I think that that is where the power is, because I am tired of Chester Atkins and Speaker McGee and Senator Belger and Ted Kennedy and Tip O'Neill and all of those guys making the decision on who is going to control those seats. You see, you still have to ask the men, and you still have to say to them, would you pretty please let the Democratic Party endorse me? And until we start using those numbers in a very powerful way, we will continue to beg and we will continue to ask. And I hope I'm there when I see a woman governor of Massachusetts or a woman anything in the state of Massachusetts. And I just think that the feminists, the women, have a long way to go. And I hope that we continue, because I myself have already announced that I will be leaving the Democratic Party, because I don't believe that the Democratic Party has anything to offer me.
Mary Crisp began her political career as a precinct-level volunteer in Arizona 16 and a half years ago. She was the woman who in 1976 at the Republican National Convention in Kansas City was the one we all saw and heard on TV calling the roll as the secretary to the convention. From there, she took the job which Betty now holds as co-chair of the Republican National Committee, where she served for 3.5 years before leaving to chair John Anderson's presidential campaign, the National Unity Campaign. She's currently working as a lecturer, a consultant, and a writer, and is our next speaker. Mary?
Thank you. I come from a different perspective tonight also. I am unfettered and a free agent. And as I see the climate today for American women, I see it as a very bleak picture with this administration and with the Republican new right leadership, I think it compels women to greater action. I'm looking to you here in the audience with the idea that each and every one of you, men and women, can make a difference in the political process. And I think today the greatest threat to our democracy is when individual citizens like ourselves choose not to be involved in the political process. We have great opportunities to be politicized and to affect the system, and probably the greatest treasure that Americans have is the ballot box, going to the polls. We can be members of pressure groups, we can be members of public opinion, but fourthly, we can be members of a political party. And that's what I thought I was here to talk about tonight, access and power. And the allegations that are made that political parties are weak, maybe so, but they are still the most powerful force in terms of governing in this nation today. Just look back to the presidential election of 1980. We had 60% of Americans saying they didn't like the nominees of both major parties. And we saw John Anderson in a unique spot in American politics, formed a national unity campaign, not a third party, but decided that he could make a difference and join Republicans and Democrats to support his candidacy. What I saw in that election was the power of the two parties, because the rank and file on election day, even though many thought if John Anderson could win, they would have supported him, went back to their former allegiance to either the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate. And I saw then the difficulty for someone like a John Anderson, because of the power and the abilities of the parties to nominate, to marshal volunteer support with their organization, the ability to raise money, the ability to register voters and get them to the polls. It was just that simple. And I think now that in terms of action and what women must do is really penetrate, infiltrate the party of your choice. As was pointed out earlier, women are over 50% of the population, but do we hold half the party leadership positions in either party? Do we hold half the elected offices? In the Republican Party, it was a far cry from holding half the delegates at the presidential nominating convention. And why is this? Well, I would agree with you. The political world, the economic world, the world in general is dominated by men. But I can't blame them for that. That's just the way it is. And it's not good enough to talk about the numbers. I think that women have not used the political system. They have not used it effectively or successfully. And women have not organized in a voting bloc. We have not organized our economic strength. If we want access and influence and power, and I love the word power, until we become familiar with it, we're never going to have it. And I think we have to go for it. I think we have to change our attitude. We have to become aggressive. We have to become assertive. We have to raise our expectations, and we raise our aspirations. And I'm so tired of the syndrome of licking the envelopes and the bake sales and not talking about money as if it was power. And if you think about it, you're laughing.
I didn't think you were going to say envelope.
Theoretically, that's too much. Theoretically, we're 50% of the population, and we could take over both of the parties, right? And the women of America could have elected John Anderson, theoretically. But are we willing to do the nitty-gritty work of organizational politics? Are we willing to take the party leadership positions? They're there the access is there. But I think the mentality is always be the vice chair, never the chair. And how many women around the country are chairmen, state chairmen in the Democratic Party, the Republican Party? How many are county chairmen? I look to my own experience. I was always I was a precinct captain. That was number one. Then I was a district chairman. But then I became a vice county chairman and a vice state chairman. And, of course, a co-chairman of the Republican Party. Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. But where am I here? I think that what I want to point out here is the power of organization and willing to do that kind of work, because my party, the Republican Party, was taken over by the new right. They knew exactly what they were doing. They controlled the precinct caucuses, the primaries. They controlled the convention systems in the state. They went to the national convention, and Jerry Falwell was there, Terry Dolan was there, and Phyllis Schlafly was there. That new right, making up the electronic evangelicals and the anti-women's groups and the political right in NICPAC. They helped to draft that Republican platform that denies women a right to choose and reversed a 40-year commitment to the Equal Rights Amendment. All I'm saying to you is they had the numbers, and the numbers controlled. Moderates in that convention never spoke up. All I'm suggesting is the power of nitty-gritty organizational politics. You can do it if you're willing to do it. Money is another ingredient of power. In fact, money is power. And this is one thing that women don't know the power of money. We're never the fundraisers. The finance chairman of a county committee, a state committee, has total access. The most influential people today in American politics are the large donors and the fundraisers. You only have to look at Richard Viguerie and know where money comes and who supports what candidates. Budget, political money, do women do this? Do women write checks? Have women within the parties ever formulated or developed their own economic strength? Are we in the back rooms? Do they come to us? Do candidates come to us and ask us our opinion? No. We have no economic clout, and we really have very little political clout. We've talked about supporting candidates as another way to get power, and of course, running for political office, I feel, is the ultimate, and we've heard the figures today, but I remember as co-chairman of the party for 3.5 years, I used to say that the power I had as a leader of a party was minuscule to that of being a United States Senator. And I feel that we are half the population, but again, we're not politically impotent, but we're not very powerful, and I think we can be by using the political party and doing some of the things that I've talked about, and I really want to emphasize again the access to the political power in this country. It is there, and I would go back to what you said. We just have to take it.
Our final speaker on the panel is Pat Bailey, a commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission, initially appointed in 1979 and reappointed in September 1980 to a 7-year term. Ms. Bailey has been involved for 20 years in intelligence, international economic development, foreign policy, and domestic politics, beginning her career in 1960 at the Department of State, and over the course of the next 19 years working at the Agency for International Development, the United States Congress, the White House Counsel's Office, the General Counsel's Office to the Merit Systems Protections Board, etc. Pat?
Thank you. Goodness. I'm worn out. It's very difficult to be the last speaker in a group like this. I could say what I thought I might say about affirmative action and the Republican Party and some experiences that I have had working with the party at conventions and attempting to change rules and succeeding for the most part. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about that, but I suppose it's difficult to do that without reacting a little bit to what people have said, and so I think I will try to do that a little bit more. Many women, I'm from Arkansas, and many women came to or many people, I suppose, but at least I know many women came to the Republican Party the same way Betty did, I think. if you grow up in a one-party state, it could happen either way, I expect. But if you grow up in a one-party state that is largely corrupt and racist, it gets on your nerves after a while. And you know, I mean, if the person who that you had to look to all your life as your state's leader was Orville Faubus, that could really do something to you. And finally, it's fortunate for people like me that somebody like Winthrop Rockefeller decided he needed to move to my state to get a divorce and decided to stay. Because he really started a Republican Party, and for heaven's sakes, anything was better than what we had to deal with. And, well, I just thought it might bring a little health to the politics of my state, and indeed I believe it has. But once you make a commitment like that, you particularly get annoyed when many years later all the people that you left the Democratic Party to get away from are infiltrating the delegations to your conventions. And it really is very upsetting. And I can say that at least I feel that way. And it's been a difficult few years to watch that happening. And I have to say that I think recent events show what Sandra said and what I believe is true, and what many people said for a while, that the apparent gains that women were making, politically and otherwise, through the last 10 years after we learned certain words and how to use them and began to try to employ them and work together, some genuine gains have been made. But I believe that we were really riding for a fall, and what is happening now shows the shallowness, I think, of the commitment, not of the Republican Party, not of shallowness of commitment on the part of either party, but a shallowness of commitment, period, to real success and gains for women, power-wise. Now, if the question posed tonight is whether affirmative action is the best route for women to political power, well, sure. I mean, it's better than anything else I can think of right now. And however that plays out in your party, one ought to try it. But everybody has to recognize what those of us who have been working in politics for a while know. And that is, affirmative action is one thing when you're talking about job discrimination, and you can go to court and get, if not quotas set, goals and timetables legally enforced and all that sort of thing. But then you're only asking people to give up money when you're talking about those things. And we're asking them to give up power. And people will part with their profits, though they will kick and scream, considerably faster than they will part with power. One of the things I found in the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, when 1972, when we first started working, when I first met Mary Crisp, I won't say, I might say it later. And Ann Lewis, we were all working together in our parties trying to figure out what to do. One of the things that we discovered in the Republican Party that was a great help and still can be, and is, I think, is that there were a number of women who somehow or other, laboring through the vineyards, pulling themselves up through precinct captains by whatever routes were available, were in place in the Republican Party in various positions. And because since World War II, the party had required, if you can believe this, equal numbers of men and women on all convention committees, the power to make decisions where policy was concerned for the convention, except when you went to the floor for the final vote, but the power to set policy, change rules, do the platform, was really there. It was 50-50, and in a way, it was a kind of quota, and it exists as a kind of quota now. In other words, nobody can serve on two committees, and you lose your seat if you don't have a woman on that committee. So every state at least has to have 5 women there, and they always do, I can assure you. Now, what we found was that there were a lot of women there, like Mary and many others, who were eager to exercise the clout that those numbers gave them, but had not a history of working together. But one of the ways that we were able to get the party rules changed with respect to the representation of women and a call for equal numbers of delegates, men and women from all the states, was because a woman was in charge of what is more popularly perhaps recognized in the Democratic Party as a McGovern committee. There was a woman in charge of our party in 1968 to set up, to make recommendations. And she knew the rules inside out. And besides, she knew how to manipulate the people who weren't going to agree with her. And then we discovered that the vice chair of the Rules Committee was a woman who was the chair of the party from Hawaii, a very large woman who came to the final meeting where the say was going to be said in a very long muumuu and a lei, and everybody backed off, and we got what we had come for, although it took till 2:30 in the morning. And so the structure was there even then within the party to begin to start with. Now, what is a shame is that the numbers in our party, in terms of total numbers of delegates, has not grown much beyond 30% every 4 years. And, of course, speaking of whether we could take over the party or not, a few years ago when I went to a retreat, I'll call it that, I guess, with a number of women to talk about the future of the women's movement. We do this occasionally. And Gloria Steinem, I remember, I never will forget it, all of a sudden in the middle of one of the meetings said, "I've got a great idea. My idea is feminists should take over the Republican Party." I was so startled that I looked at her for a moment and I said, "Well, it's possible." And because it's smaller and the delegates are fewer and all this, it's possible. But the lack of commitment to the nitty-gritty and to what is necessary, I think, it was nothing but an idea, but I think that Terry Dolan and Jerry Falwell and others proved that she was right. You could do it if you were willing to commit yourself to it. And so I don't really know where we go from here, and I'm not sure how best women deal with the problems in their party. But I do agree with the general premise posed here, and that is that women will not have the best route to any kind of power in politics is to see that power is exercised in the party structure from top to bottom.
I'd like to throw it open now a little bit. You've all got cards that have been passed around, and what we'd like to do is if you have questions for the panel as a whole or for any individual, to write them down on the card, pass them in, and our folks back here will pick them up. But as you do, I'd like to push the panel a little more on where we all seem to be ending up. In the Democratic Party, we have these rules that we've heard about that most people seem to think are terrific rules. We had 50% women at the last convention. We had actual women's caucuses at the Democratic Convention. We had women pushing through platform planks that were not the planks of either candidate, the only group to do that, the only group to get together. And yet, as Sandra points out, that's all well and good. It's nice to have women like Ann Lewis in terrific jobs at the DNC, but what does it get us in terms of power if we still don't control the Senate, if we still don't have representation in any significant number in the United States Congress, in the Massachusetts state legislature, and I hardly think Massachusetts is unrepresentative, particularly on this. Where are we in terms of actual power? If we all agree that affirmative action is a good route within our parties, does it give us any power ultimately?
I'll start with that. One, certainly I agree totally with Sandra. The issue is, and I hope nothing I said, women are not as powerful as we should be, and we won't be. Women and minorities will not be until the decision-making structure in this country truly looks like the country itself. Right now we have a decision-making structure that is preponderantly white and male. But I do believe we can open it up. One, it is possible to open it up. And two is, I think what I was trying to say is the way to begin, at least as a Democrat opening up, is by opening up at the party level, because that does do two things. It simply changes the people that are in the room. If it is at least a Democratic National Committee, commission, task force, group that's deciding who gets what or who's given out, we do know that half the people in the room are now going to be women. The results of that have been, and I think it's measurable on the issues, increasingly we're going to be able to do more for women candidates. It is a disgrace what this party has not done for women candidates in the past, but on that at least we were not sexist. The Democratic Party hasn't done zip for candidates of either sex for too many years. We were just too busy running everybody for themselves. I think this is the first year when, for reasons that are now obvious to all of us, we are as a party making a commitment to help candidates. and a very important part of that is going to be women. Two things. One is every time we do a training academy now, we have one elective for women candidates. And so there's always one time whenever we do an official party training school for candidates and their campaign staff, that one of the programs is always a place where women who are interested in running, people who are going to be staff for women, can get together and talk about it. Two, we will have our first event next week, what we're calling the Eleanor Roosevelt Fund, which is going to be a Democratic National Committee program just to raise money to give to Democratic women candidates. So we recognize that, and we've got to get better. You're absolutely right about legislative leadership. I don't think there are half a dozen women in legislative leadership in the country, and I'm pretty sure of that because whenever anybody hears about one, they run in and tell me. They know I keep track of such things, and I think the number's only up to about 4. But we are doing better on things like, for example, women who are chairs of state parties, and I'm kind of pleased with that. I was just, as we were talking and listening, trying to make my notes. Well, I hate to be definitive. You do understand that if, as a staff person, I announce who I think are all the women state chairs and leave one off, they might be upset. But I can at the very least tell you that we have women state chairs in Washington, Oregon, California, Oklahoma, Georgia, Idaho, Nebraska, Colorado, and Michigan. And some of those are some of our best state parties. They are absolutely some of my favorite state chair people in terms of energy and interest and well-funded programs. So it is beginning to happen. Because I'm saying it is beginning to happen does not by any means mean that I delude myself to think we have succeeded. But by God, I think we've made a good start.
My answer to that is that I think that women have limited themselves to 2 parties. I think the country has limited themselves to 2 parties. It seems to me that if the party is not serving your needs, then you get out the party and you start another party. The people in this country are unwilling to separate themselves from the 2 parties. In European countries, there are many different parties. And in America, there's 2 parties. So that if you have a party that is male-dominated and probably will stay male-dominated for the next 10 years, because I think that's how long it's going to take to really have women in the seat of power in this country, given the kind of legislation that is going on in Congress now, then my only opt is to opt out and try to create another political party. And I think that we need to think about political parties in this country that service our needs. I think everybody needs to think about political parties. And I think that's an alternative direction that we need to think about. Black people as well as women in this country need to think about alternative parties.
Sandra, I think if you're in a hurry to get women elected to office, I think Mary's absolutely right. I think it's going to be a long time before there is a third major party in this country, and I think historically this is true. There were a couple of statements that I'd like to address that were made by Mary and Pat that I really have to refute. Number one.
If I was sitting where you were.
Oh, I'll wait till she says it.
You don't know what I'm refuting. The Republican Party has not been taken over by the New Right or the Moral Majority or anyone else. You know, if you think that one convention and the delegates who are at one convention take over the party structure, you're absolutely wrong. It does not happen. And I think you can look at the people who are sitting in leadership positions in the Republican Party at the county level, the state level, and the national level, and you will see for yourself that that is not true. Also, the Republican Party is not funded by Richard Viguerie. We don't need Richard Viguerie. The Republican Party has 1,500,000 small contributors that give to us on a routine basis. The average contribution is $27. We are perfectly capable of funding our own programs, and we'll have a very adequate budget this year for our candidates and our party programs. To go on further and address what I perceive to be part of the problem with the lack of women candidates is I think this country is just now arriving at the point where they find women candidates acceptable. And this has been a dramatic change. There are many districts now where a woman can win where a man could not. But I think this has been an evolution, which I think probably was brought about to a large degree by the feminist movement. And I think this is one of the major contributions that the feminist movement has made. Another point I think that you have to make is, in order to elect Republicans, it's a habit. In order to elect women, women have to be willing to offer themselves as candidates. I think there are any number of things that we can do to encourage them, like the campaign schools, the training sessions that Ann says that they have at the Democrat National Committee. We've been doing that for quite some time. The National Federation of Republican Women published a book that was really designed to help women make up their minds to run for office. And the title of that book is Consider Yourself a Public Office. And it talks about all the different things that a woman must consider when running for office, which are unique to women. We've sold thousands of these books all across the country. And I think this one thing has been helpful in motivating women to run. But, you can increase the numbers of women elected if you don't have the candidates. And I think that's one of the major problems, is women perceiving themselves as potential public servants.
I don't want to divert the conversation, but I really should say, Betty, what I said was not that the New Right had taken over the party. I said infiltrated the delegations to the National Convention.
No, Mary said it.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said. I said anyway. I really was careful about that. The fact of the matter is, of course, I don't even think they can. They have said frequently they do not consider themselves Republicans. They will go where they think they can do the best for themselves, which is, I suppose, something we needn't criticize them for. If I thought that the party apparatus or the party or anything that was important about it to me was taken over, I would, would I still be strolling around here trying to do something? No. So I don't think that has happened, but it is nevertheless very troubling.
Betty, I just like, excuse me.
Let Mary go
Yes.
first. So you can respond.
I would just like to comment on, for example, what I see as the New Right agenda. And the New Right agenda, I don't think, is mainstream Republican thinking. The New Right agenda wants to denigrate and subjugate American women, and therefore a reversal on the Equal Rights Amendment, which is a civil rights issue, therefore asking for a constitutional amendment banning abortion. These were planks in the Republican platform. And I would move on with the social agenda of the New Right. And if you can see this being separate from the Republican Party today, we have out of the administration an attempt to give tax exemption to segregated schools. We see a weakening alternative for the Voting Rights Act. In fact, I don't even know if they want to approve of that. And the voting rights of this country is fundamental to a democracy. The appointments to the Civil Rights Commission, just review that. Republican. Then look at the most...
I think we're leaving the agenda.
Pardon me?
I think we're leaving the agenda.
I don't think so. Then the last thing would be the attempt to limit the federal court's jurisdiction on social issues. And we have 20 bills now that have been introduced, mostly by Republicans, into the Congress. And that, to me, is very frightening. And even when Senator Barry Goldwater, my senator, 10 days ago, voted against the anti-busing legislation, he did it because he wanted to protect the independence of the judicial system and also to give the court the right to review those kinds of concerns like abortion, busing. And it's all part of the same, in my view. It's only my perspective, and we have a very good chance of disagreeing.
Let me...
Could I just answer her question?
I just want to get some of the questions from the audience.
Okay. I just want to make this short. Betty, in reference to what you said about it would take a very long time to create another party, it is taking a very long time for women to achieve power within any party. So I would rather, yes, I am impatient. I am impatient with government. I am impatient with the process of government. I am impatient with them taking me back 100 years. I am impatient as a black woman in this country. I am impatient as a woman in this country. And I think all women should be impatient with the governmental process that does not give you your fundamental rights. And I think we all should be impatient with it, and we should move on to achieve the power that we seek post-haste before we will not be here to seek that power. It is all about survival now, and I think that women have to know and understand what survival is all about. You're right, I'm impatient, because I'm tired of sliding back 100 years. I'm 40 years old. I got into business when I was 26, and right, I'm tired. I am damn tired.
Sandra, I don't think anybody at the table disagrees with you to say that we should move on now and take the power. That's the question. I think that's what we're here for tonight. How is it that we best do that? If maybe you think it is the best thing to do to form a third party, I think what some of the others are saying is that the apparatus, at least of the other parties, is there, and what is the best way, the most effective way, to try to go about getting the kind of power in the parties that we all think and agree that we need. I mean, I don't think anybody disagrees with that proposition. The question is what to do.
Well, there are different things you can do. You can grow out of a movement and don't wait for the Democratic Party, such as I did. And I grew out of a movement in the late 60s and the early 70s and was elected to office. There are other ways besides the political process. There are movements going on in this country, and we have to take advantage of those movements and get ourselves elected in those movements. And part of that is now, 1982, there's plenty of movements going on now.
Let me move to some of the questions and come back to this. The interesting thing reading through your questions is the questions are all essentially Pat's question. How do we move up from the precinct level? How do we stop making coffee? Is going to training school going to do us any good? And the one that recurs the most that I'd like to start tossing around along with these others is the answer to try to develop women as a voting bloc? Is the problem that we're getting women in positions within the party, but women voters aren't voting for women candidates or pushing women candidates? And that should be our answer. Maybe since Pat started, we'll start.
Well, I'll just try to address that. If the sure, the answer is to try to develop women as a voting bloc. But that was the great fear that held back the suffrage amendment for jillions of years, was that women would be a voting bloc. And the result, the history is that they never have been. That women have never voted as a bloc or a group.
To have other women support them. If we sit around and wait for anyone else to do it for us, we will wait a very long time. 2, however, once you've made the decision to be a candidate, the more you know about the process, the better you will do. There's simply no question that campaigning is expensive, that especially for women, resources are finite. When I talk about education, I'm talking about maybe a 2.5-day course, which is the maximum that we do at the Democratic National Committee, and it's the most time I've ever been able to get any candidate to give me, and I sometimes have to coax them for 2.5 days. But I do think it's important that we learn some basic skills about how to use well whatever money we're going to raise. Because otherwise we aren't going to get far enough. But no, you've said it all. We've got to have women running, and we've got to have other women get in there and support them. Ultimately, we will only achieve power when we have women in there where the votes are cast or where the money is given out. I would only again suggest, I do think affirmative action right now is one way to get to the place we're trying to go.
Any other final comments from the group in summation? I would like, on behalf of the Institute of Politics, to thank the students here who did such a terrific job in organizing this event, to thank our panelists for coming, and to thank all of you. Good night.